A Divinely Lit World by Samantha Brandon. Here we have the table of contents. Here is a quote by Richard Rohr. But I want to suggest that the first incarnation was the moment described in Genesis 1, the creation of the world, when God joined in unity with the physical universe and became the light inside of everything. Fullest joy. So I do want to talk about the beginning of the universe, but first, think for a moment about a time you felt really happy. Maybe it was a birthday, or maybe someone had told you some good news or given you a compliment. What is that feeling? I would like to call that feeling fullness. And maybe it's the same for you, but when I feel that feeling, I want to share it. I want everyone to be as filled up as I am. The hobbits in Tolkien's fantasy world of Middle-earth have a tradition of giving presents on their own birthdays. Tolkien writes of our own dear Bilbo, the main character of the first Hobbit story, turning 11 and of the party that was being thrown. And when he says, Hobbits give presents to other people on their own birthdays. Not very expensive ones as a rule, and not so lavishly as on this occasion, but it is not a bad system. On this occasion, the presents were unusually good. Many of them, indeed, had been ordered a year before, and had come all the way from the mountain and from Dale, and were of real dwarf make. We are told that the land that Bilbo lived in was green and full of life. The hobbits lived in comfortable burrows close to the earth. There are flowers, gardens, and, well, abundance everywhere. Now in Middle-earth there is another mountain, and it is the mountain of Bilbo's story. In this mountain there was a dragon at one time, and here nothing grows. The dragon had vast treasures, truly an unimaginable amount, but he was alone, and there was no life there. So let's hold on to this idea of fullness, this fullness that can't wait to share. It spills over and it wants to bring everything and everyone into its own joy. That is what there was before the beginning, a full joy, a joy that was so complete, so held, so known, so strong. The fire. Now, before we move on, I do want to say that Bilbo gave from the overflow of his generous heart, but Bilbo was more than just his generosity. He was more than just the overflow. So we talk about the divine pouring out from his overflow, but we do need to remember that he is more than that. His He is deeper than the overflow that pours out into the world and the universe that we can see. Now we'll go back to the fire. Physicists tell us that at the beginning of the universe, there was a fullness of energy. The four forces that we know today may all have been one. Everything that would ever exist was packed together, and space itself was almost unimaginably small. That's what physicists would say, and the scientist theologian Teilhard would agree with them. But he would also say that if it were possible to see inside this energy, you would know that it was called love, actually, even divine love. In the beginning, it was dark and cold, but there was a fire, Teilhard says, the fire, the source of our being. He also writes, in the beginning was power, intelligent, loving, energizing. In the beginning was the Word, supremely capable of mastering and molding whatever might come into being in the world of matter. In the beginning, there was not coldness and darkness, there was fire. This is the truth. The forces. There's a NASA advisor who writes how strange the earliest moments of the universe were. All the forces that we know of were gone. So were the particles. There were no electrons, no quarks, no neutrinos, no dark matter, no photons, no gluons. There was something else. We're not sure yet what that something else was, but it was in many ways pure, an essence that suffused all of reality, existing in a state of graceful equilibrium and homogeneity. So the fire and energy burst forth, and as it went out, it cooled. And as it cooled, the one original force split up into the four we know today. There was gravity first, then the strong nuclear force, and finally the weak nuclear force, and the electromagnetic force split apart from each other. Physics, as we know it today, were being established. Protons and neutrons. The bursting forth causes ripples in space. And in the ripples, the tiniest of particles physicists call them quarks, which is an appropriately cute name for the smallest particles, are able to gather up, cooling just enough for them to bind together into the first protons and neutrons. The great joy that poured out at the beginning is first interested in bringing things together. If everything is spread out, how can everything enjoy each other? So bringing them together is the work of the forces and energy. These protons and neutrons became the building blocks of every atom. The cosmic microwave. As things were being pulled together, the fire was still burning. We can think of it as a great burning forge of a glassblower or a blacksmith. From this furnace, protons remain as hydrogen nuclei, about 75%, while some fuse with neutrons into helium, about 25%, with traces of lithium. The universe is now like a fog because light can't travel very far. And it is a plasma, which is electrically charged particles of bare nuclei and loose electrons. Finally, the universe cools to about 3,000 degrees Kelvin. Electrons settle onto nuclei to form the first complete neutral atoms, and then the fog clears. Light streams freely across space for the first time. That very first light is still arriving today. It is stretched by cosmic expansion into a faint microwave glow. Scientists discovered this glow and they named it the cosmic microwave background. They mapped the heat. Our microwaves produce our microwaves heat things, right? Of the glow, and it's like a baby picture of the universe. This is a picture of it, and our Milky Way is the red band on the right side. New elements. They say that at this time the universe was dark, but the full joy was still there, still overflowing and bringing things together. Now it is seen in the quiet work of gravity. Invisible dark matter forms an invisible skeleton on which that slowly drawing the denser regions, remember those ripples, together. The atoms drifted in the ripples, and when they drifted close, the pull of gravity finally squeezes a gas cloud so tightly that nuclear fusion ignites and a star lights up the dark. The stars were their own furnaces, and the universe let them cook. They brought elements together and made new things. Hydrogen into helium, helium into carbon, carbon into oxygen. Gifts from the stars. Over time, the first stars died in what are known as supernova explosions, scattering their elements into space and forging still heavier ones such as iron. Gold is made when dead stars themselves collide. The life cycles of these stars was a gift to the universe. Generation after generation of stars is born, lives, and dies. Each supernova gives the galaxy heavier elements, and each new wave of stars forms from this rich recycled material. Over more time, a cloud of gas and dust start gathering up, spinning fast until it makes a disk. At the center is our sun, and the material swirling around it gathers up into the planets, including our own Earth. Our Earth was molten hot lava and was still being hit by asteroids that had no breathable air. Gravity was pulling it together. The energy forces were still hard at work. It was cooling, and as it was cooling, the water vapor condensed, and the first oceans formed. Genesis tells us the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Particles learn to do something new. They make more of themselves. Eventually, the first cells arrive, and photosynthesis, the gathering of energy from the sun to fuel life, evolves. A crucial piece of this is oxygen, which is released into the air. We can all take a deep breath of relief. We can see here that planet Earth, as it changes through the ages, just massive amounts of progress towards life from the gathering with the volcanoes that was uninhabitable towards a place that is just teeming with life over the ages. The fire continues. We can continue the story through evolution of all of life on Earth, but what I'd like for us to continue to hold as we move from matter to cells to life to nervous systems to brains, is how it is all being moved by the laws of nature. And we have gotten so good at observing the laws of nature, and we can test them and prove them so accurately. But what we are also but we are also able to observe the inside of the laws of nature, which is the love, the fire of overflowing joy that gathers things together in order to give it its fullest life. Okay, so there's some resources I recommend. A lot of these websites are some of them really fantastic. We're going to move on to our next unit, which is called God with Us. So after thinking about the way the universe started, I had a few questions. If God is love and has poured out this way into the universe, then what does that say about the divine? The universe, also the second question I had was the universe is changing all the time through evolution. So what does that mean? Does that mean that God changes? So I have a story that might help us think about these questions. There's an amazing book called Anne of Green Gables, set in early 1900s, Prince Edward Island, Canada. Anne is an 11-year-old orphan who was taken in by the aging brother and sister, Matthew and Marilla, to help them with farm chores as they slow down. Anne is not who they expect. For starters, they thought they were going to get a boy. Matthew is a good man who takes good care of his farm and his animals, but he is painfully shy and terrified of all women, which has isolated him. When he got to the train station and he saw a girl instead of a boy, he was stunned. Anne is extroverted, bubbly, imaginative, and delightful, and Matthew melts almost instantly. Marilla finds her, overwhelming. As the story continues, Matthew becomes someone who lives to see Anne be happy. Marilla is opposed to raising Anne at first, but by the end of the story, she is the one who actually changes the most. At one point in the story, Matthew asks his neighbor, Mrs. Lynde, to sew a fashionable dress for Anne because he knew Anne would love it, and Marilla would disapprove. The neighbor was delighted and thought to herself, I suppose she, meaning Marilla, is trying to cultivate a spirit of humility in Anne by dressing her as she does, but it's more likely to cultivate envy and discontent. I'm sure the child must feel the difference between her clothes and the other girls. But think of Matthew taking notice of it. That man is waking up after being asleep for over 60 years. Matthew and Marilla's love for Anne is what changed them. If Matthew was never changed by the loud sunshine of Anne, we would think he was a cold, shut down, and even less than human. We can also notice that Matthew did not change into someone else entirely or develop a new nature. As Mrs. Lynde said, he woke up. He was more himself than he had ever been, but he was still Matthew in his own Matthew nature. The part of him that the world had not seen before was fully consistent with Matthew and was now living out that part because it had a place to express itself. And we recognize this as real love. God's love is real and it's personal, and loving the world changes God. The divine is becoming more and more themselves in the world as matter and creation gives the divine a place to express themselves. There's more to this idea beyond the metaphor, though. As we have talked about, the divine is the love inside of all matter. So, what happens to the matter of the earth happens to the divine. More than that, humans have been given the ability to turn down the pole of the energy of love in a way that no other being in the created order has. Divine love does not force. We would quickly be repulsed by an emotion you have no control over, and we would know that that was not real. We have been given the dignity of this choice for the world, humanity, and the divine to move forward, to progress together means to choose to walk in the love that we were made of and for. Okay, moving on to Jesus with us. With cosmogenesis being transformed, as we said, into Christogenesis, it is the stuff, the mainstream, the very being of the world which is now being personalized. Someone, and no longer something, is in gestation in the universe. Teilhard teaches that Jesus has been an evolution and has been drawn towards Teilhard teaches that Jesus has been what evolution has been drawing towards since the beginning. We have talked about the pattern we see of matter joining with matter and beings joining with beings, and how this is built up throughout history, and the interior energy that is at work in all matter. In the story of Anne of Green Gables, we could see the shining of the interior love that existed in each of the people in the story. Teilhard believed that love existed at the interior of everything. It is a dim light in the more simple things and beings, but as the being grew in complexity, the light grows brighter. Love is not sentiment or emotion alone. Rather, love is the affinity of being with being. It is the dynamic energy of all life and embraces all the forms successively adopted by organized matter. If there was not an internal inclination for unitive life, even at the basic level of molecules, it would be physically impossible for love to appear higher up in human form. It is love that draws together and unites, says Ilia Delio. Teilhard's logic is that we cannot see love or consciousness in a person appear out of nowhere. It's not something that magically activates with people. Anyone who has ever loved an animal would say that they have an ability to love, which is this interiority showing up in a more dimly than in humans. This interior shows up all the way down, but like a dim light, it gets harder to see the fainter it is. It is my personal belief that interiority is not based on intelligence or ability. Love is a wild energy that doesn't fit into orderly measurement. A person's connection to love and their being love in the world is not something that we would be very good at quantifying. One of the major purposes of love is to draw everything and everyone into their fullest life, which is unity with each other and with the divine. Since the first spark of time, the interior of everything has been drawn towards this unity. Jesus is love, personalized and humanized. As such, he shows how humans can be united to love. Delio says, Christ does not save us from sin, but shows us how to rise above sin. That is, to rise above incompleteness, resistance, and apathy through the power of love. In the Broadway musical Hadestown, which tells the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, um, in it, Eurydice has ended up down below in Hadestown, and Orpheus, in his great love for her, descends to bring her back. In the course of the story, Hades allows them to try to ascend back to the world, to the living, on the condition that Orpheus walk the long path in front of Eurydice without looking back and checking for Eurydice. Can Orpheus defeat his own internal struggle, which is portrayed by the voices of the fates? Can a person walk the path from death to life? The god Hermes, who has been a friend to Orpheus, he tells him in this song, the meanest dog you'll ever meet. It ain't a hound dog in the street. He bares his teeth and tears your skin, but brother, that's the worst of him. The dog you really got to dread is the one that howls inside your head. It's him whose howling drives the man mad and a mind to its undoing. You got a lonesome road to walk. It ain't along the railroad track. It ain't along the blacktop tar you've walked 100 times before. I'll tell you where the real road lies, between your ears, behind your eyes. That is the path to paradise, and likewise the road to ruin. Ultimately, Orpheus fails at attaining life for Eurydice. He doubts himself and he doubts Eurydice. The significance of Jesus is that he did not fail in showing the way. He succeeded in something humanity had not been able to do before. The path is one of deep suffering. It is a story of love that was able to endure the pain of death, to prove that death is not the end that we always thought it was. Instead, death is the place of transformation. Love is overflowing goodness that wants good for the loved. The invitation of love, then, is to follow Jesus on his path to full life. It is the invitation to Anne to go home with Matthew to Green Gables. It's the invitation for the wealthy, has everything Scrooge when he wakes up and realizes he can try again. It's the chance for Orpheus and Eurydice to get back her life. It is the path to true life that is offered to us. Go backwards. Jesus' way, as shown from his life and teachings, he brought together people from all levels of society. across all barriers. He healed, especially the social outcast, and he fed people. He took care of their needs. Here's some of his words, which is, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. He said, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. Which of these three do you think proved to be the neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? That is, of course, from the story of the Good Samaritan. He tells his disciples, but take heart, I have overcome the world. He prays, Holy Father, keep them in your name, which you have given me, that they may be one, even as we are one. But now I am coming to you, that these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in themselves. We know that we who have passed out of death into life, because we love the brothers. Whoever does not love abides in death. That is from John later, not Jesus. Okay, we need to interrupt for an important message. This is something that's important about how love works. Teilhard saw in nature that when two elements united, they became more themselves than they were before, and also became something new. In Anne of Green Gables, Matthew, Marilla, and Anne were three people living in the house, but as they grew in love for each other, they each changed. Matthew woke up after 60 years, experiencing love and joy from watching Anne grow and enjoying her company. Marilla allowed Anne to love her and learned to love her in return. And now that she was safe and loved, Anne thrived in school, followed her passions, and created a beautiful relationship with many. As they united, they became something new, a family. But they also each became more themselves. There's two quotes, one from Teilhard and one from Delio. Love alone is capable of uniting living things in a way as to complete and to fulfill them, for it is alone, for it alone takes them and joins them by what is deepest in themselves. Delio says, we know love implicitly because we feel love as a deepening of well-being in relation to another. Love draws together and unites, and in uniting one to another, it differentiates. This was a huge theme in Teilhard. The true thriving of a person in themselves first is what makes that person the best in relationships. We know this by intuition, which is where we get the terms like enmeshed and toxic to describe people who lose themselves in a relationship. This is important because our current context, as much of religion has looked like conforming to somebody else's idea for you. It is a demand from the outside. It is a mold where everyone looks the same. If I were to say the word cult, you probably get a mental image of people all dressed alike. In Hadestown, one of the things that would happen to the people down below is they forget their true identity. So the path to life is a fierce allegiance to yourself and a relentless energy to do the work to be your truest self. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled presentation. The road to you and the road to the divine. Teilhard wrote, the deeper I descend into myself, the more I find God at the heart of my being. The more I multiply the links that attach me to things, the more closely does he hold me. The God who pursues me in the task, as endless as the world's sum of centuries of the incarnation of his Son. We are invited into love, but how do we experience that love? We live in the real world, not fairy tales. Teilhard was actually thrilled we lived in the real world, as he thought we could find the divine in all things. By loving the earth, the trees, the birds, we were loving the divine. And most clearly, we would find the divine by going deep inside ourselves. Celtic theologian John O'Donohue had a beautiful image of this. I'm going to read this long quote. Ready? In the west of Ireland, one of the lovely kind of things is when the nights are long and there's a big fire put down and an open fire of turf that's been cut from the bog. And often when you go to visit someone on a winter's night, you'll go through a bleak kind of night and a landscape, and then you come into the hearth. There'd be the dance of the fire and the whole warmth and the magic of its presence. It's a real ancient kind of magic because the turf is earth, and to have the earth burning within the family and the domesticity of a house is a pretty wild kind of thing. But I love the image of a hearth as a place of home and warming and a place of return. And I believe that in everyone's inner solitude, that there is a bright and warm hearth, and that the idea of the unconscious, which is a very profound and wonderful idea, has sometimes frightened people away from coming back to their own hearth because we falsely understand the subconscious as the cellar, if you like, where all of our repression is actually housed, and we have made monsters down there because we are so afraid of ourselves. Whereas in actual fact, that's only a little portion of it, but the main part of our soul has this warmth and this welcome to it. I think of it, I think one of the reasons we were sent to the earth is to make this connection with ourselves and to have this kind of friendship. When I say, this quote from Rumi is one of my favorites. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and to find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. When I say you should slow down and look inside yourself, I want to acknowledge that this is not comfortable. What you find first is your insecurities, your self-doubt, noise, and everything else we try constantly to outrun. These are the things that Rumi was talking about that keep us from knowing love. O'Donoghue says that when he mentions the monsters in the cellar, you just have to know that there is also a hearth of welcome and of warmth. So keep going because underneath the part you're afraid of, there's a hearth. And divine love, which is what we've talked about as being a part of our world and in Jesus, there is the deepest connection, is there as the deepest connection to our own deepness. Okay, I have a fun metaphor, if you can hear me out, on what's the same and what's different. So in Harry Potter, they have the flu network, right? They step into the fireplace with the flu powder and they say the right word, and it can end up hopefully in another fireplace. And like our own inner hearth, the flu network can be disorienting and scary. You might think twice about jumping in. Well, what O'Donoghue and Deliode and Teilhard believe is that our innermost hearth is connected to all other hearths, and that God's own hearth is the center that every hearth opens to directly. So the network would be that everyone's heart um, opens directly to the hearth of God. Um, Teilhard called God the center of centers. But through the center of centers, we are connected to everyone else, which I just think is the most beautiful image. The biggest difference in my metaphor then is that your depths hearth isn't a portal you leave in order to arrive somewhere else. The hearth is the destination, and the divine is at it. And the connection to everything is found by staying and going deeper, not by escaping or leaving. Maybe we can imagine our innermost hearth as having roots that are always going deeper, stronger, and more connected. That hearth would not only be warm, but unshakable and a real refuge. This is a little refuge on top of a rock in the picture. The love of the divine will always have you go deeper into your realist self because that is where the divine is. All right. So this is our last section where we are invited into the story. This year, I went on a beaver adventure with two of my teens, with the leader of a local nonprofit, trudging upriver to take measurements and to document how the beavers were doing. It was so much fun. Over the last decade, beaver advocates have gotten beavers designated as a keystone species in California. Beaver populations are not what they used to be in California, but the nonprofit is doing a lot of research and education in California about how beavers help land absorb water, how they help reduce fire risk and promote vegetation growth. All three of these things are huge in California. Millions are spent on this problem, and beavers are just working away for free. The beaver people host a street fair downtown every year. No matter your talent, they can use you. You are also welcome in the community. They also have smaller bonfires at their house. People bring food, drinks, and instruments. Kids run and play. People eat and play songs and dance. They laugh and tell stories. They celebrate life, and everyone there knows that if they meet someone new, they have the love of the beaver in common. Could this be the future of the church in microcosm? I just feel like this is such a great example of what we are being invited into, which is to love and care for the earth, to love and care for each other, to um, become our fullest selves in connection with the earth, but in connection with our talents and our passions. Um, it's a fantastic example of what could be possible, um, for Christians moving forward. There are places to jump in everywhere. As I started researching, there are so many people doing amazing things. This first man, Neil Spakman, is bringing grasses back to places in Africa, and he's had fantastic success in bringing grasses that help hold water again to lands that are just desert. He says, we do not have to settle for being less bad for the earth. We can actually be good for the earth. We are not destructive by nature, but by habit. And our potential for destruction is mirrored by our potential for regeneration. And then the Nepa state in Britain is very famous, but fantastic and beautiful. Well, this is everything. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. Thank you.